What if your mind suddenly erased who you are, leaving you to live as a complete stranger? What if you woke up one day convinced you were already dead, or that your entire life was nothing more than a staged reality show? These aren't scenes from a horror movie. They are real mental disorders that have left doctors baffled and victims trapped inside their own terrifying realities. Tonight, we're diving into the 5 creepiest and rarest psychological syndromes you've never heard of, but will never forget. The Amnesia Fugue Syndrome, dissociative fugue. Imagine waking up one morning and not remembering your own name. You walk into the kitchen, and the people sitting at the table greet you warmly, but you have no idea who they are. You look in the mirror, and the face staring back feels like a stranger. It sounds like the start of a horror movie, but for some people, this is reality. Today, we're diving into one of the most mysterious and unsettling conditions of the human mind, dissociative disorders, sometimes even described as a kind of dementia of identity. This isn't about forgetting where you left your keys. This is about forgetting yourself. In simple terms, a dissociative disorder happens when the brain disconnects from reality. Think of your mind as a giant library. Normally, all the books are neatly stacked: your memories, your emotions, your sense of who you are. But in a dissociative state, those shelves collapse. The books scatter. Some go missing. And sometimes, you don't even know they ever existed. Why would the brain do something so extreme? Strangely enough, dissociation is a survival mechanism. Imagine a child experiencing something unbearably traumatic. The brain basically says, "This is too much. I'm going to protect you by shutting this off, by hiding it away." At first, that works like a shield. But later in life, it can turn into a prison. Instead of blocking out just the trauma, the mind starts blocking out entire pieces of memory, identity, and reality. There are some incredible real-life cases that show how powerful this disorder can be. Take the story of a man in the 1980s who disappeared from his home. Years later, he was discovered living in another state with a completely new name, a job, and even friends who thought he had always been that person. He had slipped into what's known as a dissociative fugue. His mind had erased everything about his old life and let him start over, like pressing a reset button. When his original family finally found him, he had no memory of them. Imagine how terrifying that must be for him and for the people who loved him. So what does this feel like day to day? People with dissociative disorders often experience frightening gaps in memory. Whole parts of their lives are missing, especially around stressful or traumatic times. Some feel detached from themselves, like they're watching their life unfold from the outside. Others describe floating above their own body, as if they're not really there. In severe cases, they can suddenly travel away from home, create a new identity, and have no awareness of who they used to be. Even when they're not in that extreme state, many describe a constant fog, a numbness, or the unsettling feeling of being a stranger in their own skin. Now, think about what that does to daily life. How do you keep a job when you can't remember what you did yesterday? How do you maintain a relationship when your partner says, "We talked about this last week," and you have no memory of it? It's not just the memory loss. It's the confusion, the fear, and the heartbreak of losing yourself again and again. Many people with dissociative disorders also struggle with depression, anxiety, and even thoughts of suicide, because when your very identity feels unstable, it's hard to find solid ground. But here's the important part. There is hope. The main treatment is psychotherapy, working with a trained therapist to slowly reconnect the broken pieces of memory and identity. Techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and even EMDR, which helps process traumatic memories, can make a huge difference. Medication doesn't cure dissociation directly, but it can help with depression and anxiety that often come along with it. Recovery isn't quick, and it isn't easy, but many people do get better. They learn grounding techniques. They build stronger support systems. They rediscover the parts of themselves that felt lost forever. And this is why dissociative disorders matter, even if they seem rare. They remind us how fragile and powerful the human mind really is. Memory, identity, personality, these aren't fixed things. They're processes constantly happening inside our brains. When those processes break down, the results are both tragic and fascinating. So the next time you forget where you left your phone, or you walk into a room and wonder why you're there, take a deep breath. That's normal. But for people living with dissociative disorders, the forgetting goes far deeper. It's not about misplacing objects. It's about misplacing yourself. And maybe, by learning about these conditions, we can be a little more compassionate, a little more curious, and a little more grateful for the fragile gift of memory that most of us take for granted every single day. The multiple personality syndrome, dissociative identity disorder. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. They're calm, quiet, maybe even shy. But then, just hours later, you meet them again and suddenly they're confident, outgoing, even aggressive. Same face, same body, but a completely different person. Sounds like a movie twist, right? But for people living with dissociative identity disorder, often called multiple personality syndrome, this isn't fiction. It's their reality. Dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is one of the most fascinating and misunderstood mental health conditions in the world. For decades, it's been the subject of books, movies, and endless debate. Some people think it's too strange to be real. Others believe it's one of the clearest examples of how trauma can reshape the human mind. Today, we're going to dive into what DID really is, why it happens, and what it's like to live with it. At its core, DID is when one person has two or more distinct identities or personalities that take turns controlling their body. These identities, often called alters, can have their own names, their own ages, their own voices, even their own handwriting. One alter might be a child who loves cartoons, while another is an adult who speaks with a completely different accent. Imagine carrying an entire cast of characters inside your own mind, and not always knowing who's going to show up. So how does something like this happen? The leading theory is trauma. For many people with DID, the disorder develops as a defense mechanism against severe, repeated trauma in early childhood, often abuse or neglect. When a young child faces pain they cannot escape, the mind sometimes does something remarkable. It splits. Instead of one unified sense of self, the brain creates separate identities to hold different memories, feelings, or experiences. One identity might carry the anger, another might carry the fear, another might carry the happy memories. It's a survival strategy, the ultimate form of mental compartmentalization. For the person living with DID, this can be incredibly confusing. They might experience blackouts in their memory, because when one alter is in control, the others may not know what happened. Imagine looking at your phone and seeing text you don't remember sending, or finding yourself in a place with no idea how you got there. For many, this isn't just occasional forgetfulness. It's a daily struggle. To make this real, let's talk about a few well-known cases. One of the most famous was a woman named Shirley Mason, who became the subject of the book and movie Sybil. She was reported to have 16 different personalities, each with unique behaviors and voices. While some details of her story have been debated, her case opened up public awareness of DID in a way the world had never seen before. There are also modern stories of people on YouTube and social media openly sharing their lives with DID. They post videos switching between alters, explaining what it feels like, and answering questions from curious viewers. For many, these creators are helping break the stigma by showing DID not as a monster movie plot, but as a real condition that real people live with every day. So what does DID actually feel like? People describe it in different ways. Some say it's like being a passenger in their own body, watching someone else take the wheel. Others describe it as waking up from a dream, only to realize hours have passed and they don't know what they've been doing. Alters can sometimes argue with each other inside the mind, or even leave notes for each other as a way of communicating. It can be disorienting, frightening, but also, in a strange way, protective. Because remember, DID started as a survival mechanism. Living with DID can be extremely challenging. Relationships can be complicated because partners and family members often struggle to understand who they're really with from day to day. Work and school can be difficult when memory gaps interfere with daily tasks. On top of that, DID is often misunderstood. Some people think those with DID are dangerous or violent, largely because of how movies portray them. In reality, people with DID are far more likely to hurt themselves than anyone else. The biggest struggles are usually internal, not external. Now, here's the important part. DID is treatable. The goal of treatment isn't to erase alters, but to help them work together. Through psychotherapy, people with DID can learn to reduce amnesia, build communication between alters, and eventually feel more stable in their day-to-day lives. Therapy might involve trauma processing, learning coping skills, and creating safe spaces inside the mind. It's not a quick fix. Treatment can take years, but many people with DID do make incredible progress. There's still a lot of debate about DID. Some skeptics question whether it's overdiagnosed or even real. But most experts today agree that while it may be rare, DID is a genuine and deeply human response to overwhelming trauma. And whether you believe every detail or not, the stories of those who live with DID remind us of something powerful. The human mind will do almost anything to survive. So the next time you hear about multiple personalities, remember it's not just a plot twist for Hollywood. It's a real condition that thousands of people live with, often silently, every single day. Their experiences may sound unbelievable, but for them, it's simply life. And maybe, learning about DID can teach us all something about resilience, about how strong and fragile the human mind really is. The walking corpse syndrome, Coded syndrome. Imagine waking up one morning and being absolutely convinced that you're dead. You're breathing, your heart is beating, but in your mind, you no longer exist. Maybe you believe your organs have stopped working, or your blood has dried up, or your soul has already left your body. You might even feel like you're walking around as nothing more than an empty shell. This sounds like something from a horror film, but it's a real psychological condition. It's called Coded syndrome, better known as walking corpse syndrome. This condition is one of the rarest and most disturbing mental disorders ever recorded. People who suffer from it truly believe that they are dead, or that parts of their body are missing or rotting away. Some even believe they don't exist at all. It's a haunting disorder that shows just how fragile and mysterious the human mind can be. So what exactly causes someone to believe they're a walking corpse? Coded syndrome isn't fully understood, but it's often linked to severe depression, psychotic episodes, or neurological conditions. Many patients also have a history of brain injury, stroke, or other disorders like schizophrenia. It seems to happen when the brain's perception of reality and self breaks down in a dramatic way. One theory suggests that Coded syndrome happens because of a disconnection between the parts of the brain that recognize faces and the parts that attach emotional meaning to those faces. Normally, when you look in the mirror, you recognize yourself and feel, yes, that's me. But if those systems don't connect, you might recognize your face but feel emotionally detached from it. That detachment can twist into something terrifying, the belief that you're no longer alive. To really understand how disturbing this can be, let's look at some real cases. One of the most famous was a woman in the 1800s, described by French neurologist Jules Codard, the doctor who gave the syndrome its name. She insisted that she had no brain, no nerves, no chest, no stomach, no intestines. And because of this, she believed she could not die a natural death. She refused to eat, claiming she didn't need food because she was already gone. Tragically, she starved to death, which makes her case even more chilling. There was also a modern case of a man who suffered a head injury in a motorcycle accident. After recovering physically, he became convinced that he had died and that his body was rotting. He even asked to be taken to the morgue because he believed that's where he belonged. Doctors eventually diagnosed him with Coded syndrome, and with treatment, he began to slowly recover. Imagine how terrifying that must feel, to truly believe that you no longer exist. For family members, it can be heartbreaking to see someone they love convinced they are a corpse, refusing to eat, or isolating themselves because they believe nothing matters anymore. So what does Coded syndrome actually feel like for the people living with it? Patients describe overwhelming feelings of emptiness and detachment. Some say it feels like floating in a void. Others describe smelling their flesh rotting or tasting decay in their mouth. Many stop eating or drinking, thinking they don't need to because they're already dead. Some withdraw completely from life, refusing to speak, move, or interact with the world around them. Now here's the complicated part. Coded syndrome isn't always permanent. With the right treatment, some people do recover. Doctors often use a combination of antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and therapy. In severe cases, electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, has been surprisingly effective in pulling patients out of the delusion. While ECT may sound frightening, it has actually saved lives for people who refuse to eat because they believe they were already dead. The fascinating thing about Codard syndrome is how it challenges our entire understanding of identity and existence. Think about it. Our sense of being alive is something we usually take for granted. You don't wake up every morning and ask yourself, am I real? Do I exist? But Codard patients live trapped in a nightmare where those questions have horrifying answers. For them, existence itself feels broken. This disorder also shows us how deeply the brain and mind are connected. A chemical imbalance, a stroke, or a psychological trauma can literally make someone lose the most basic belief in life, the belief that they're alive. It's chilling, but also a reminder of how fragile human consciousness really is. So why should we talk about a disorder that's so rare? Because Codard syndrome reminds us that mental health is just as real and just as important as physical health. For the people who live through it, the experience is not just strange, it's terrifying and life-threatening. And by understanding it, we not only reduce the stigma around mental illness, we also learn more about the mind itself. The walking corpse syndrome may sound like a legend, but it's real. It's not just a ghost story, it's a medical condition that proves how powerful, and sometimes how fragile, the brain can be. So the next time you look in the mirror and recognize yourself without a second thought, take a moment to appreciate that gift. Because for some people, even that simple recognition, I am alive, I am here, I exist, is a battle they have to fight every single day. The Mind-Blindness Syndrome, visual agnosia. Imagine looking directly at an object, a chair, a glass of water, even the face of your best friend, and not being able to recognize what it is. Your eyes are working fine, your vision is clear, but your brain simply cannot process the image in front of you. It's like the world turns into a puzzle that you can see, but you can't solve. This is the strange and unsettling reality of a rare condition called visual agnosia, sometimes referred to as mind-blindness syndrome. Unlike blindness, this isn't about losing your eyesight. People with visual agnosia can see. Their eyes capture the image, their pupils react to light, and their brain receives the signal. But here's the problem. The part of the brain responsible for attaching meaning to what they see isn't working properly. So while they may see a fork, they can't identify it as a fork. They might pick it up, examine it, and only after touching or using it do they realize what it is. Think about how unsettling that must feel. You look at your friend's face, but you don't recognize them. Or you look at your own home, but it feels strange and unidentifiable. The world becomes unfamiliar, like living inside a constant state of déjà vu. Now let's dig deeper into what visual agnosia really is. The word agnosia comes from Greek, meaning without knowledge. So, visual agnosia literally means seeing without knowing. It's a disorder where the brain fails to connect visual input with recognition. There are actually different types of visual agnosia, and each one can affect a person's life in unique ways. For example, there's apperceptive agnosia. In this type, people struggle to process shapes and forms. They can't copy a drawing or recognize objects by sight, but they might still identify them through touch or sound. Then there's associative agnosia, where a person can perceive shapes and objects just fine, but they can't link them to meaning. So they might draw a perfect picture of a key, but if you ask them what the drawing represents, they won't know it's a key. One of the most well-known and fascinating forms is prosopagnosia, also called face blindness. People with this condition cannot recognize familiar faces, sometimes not even their own face in the mirror. Imagine how confusing and isolating that would be to see your family or close friends every day but never recognize them by sight. So what causes visual agnosia? In most cases, it's the result of brain damage, often in the occipital or temporal lobes, the regions that process vision and recognition. This damage can come from a stroke, a head injury, or sometimes degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Essentially, the hardware of the brain is intact, the eyes are working, but the software that interprets the data is corrupted. Let me share a powerful real-life story that shows just how strange this disorder can be. The famous neurologist Oliver Sacks wrote about a man known as the man who mistook his wife for a hat. This patient had visual agnosia so severe that he literally tried to pick up his wife's head as if it were an object, because he couldn't recognize faces anymore. He could see details, the shape of her hair, the curve of her face, but he couldn't put those details together into the recognition of "this is my wife." To him, She was just a collection of shapes and patterns. Stories like this show us how much we take recognition for granted. You don't think about how your brain interprets the world every time you look around. But for people with visual agnosia, that process is broken, and the world becomes confusing, alien, and sometimes even frightening. Now, what does life look like for someone living with visual agnosia? Daily tasks that seem simple to us can become huge challenges. Imagine not being able to recognize the food on your plate, or not knowing if the object in front of you is a pen or a toothbrush. Many people with this disorder rely heavily on other senses, like touch or hearing, to navigate the world. They may use context clues, like where they are or what they expect to see, to help them guess what an object might be. But without those clues, life becomes incredibly disorienting. Unfortunately, there's no simple cure for visual agnosia, because it's usually linked to brain damage. Treatment often focuses on therapy and coping strategies rather than reversing the condition. Rehabilitation might involve teaching patients to rely on other senses or using repetitive training exercises to strengthen recognition skills. It's about finding ways to adapt to the disorder rather than fully overcoming it. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Visual agnosia reminds us that vision isn't just about seeing. Seeing is only the first step. Recognition, truly understanding what we're looking at, is something the brain has to construct. Without that step, vision itself becomes almost meaningless. It's like looking at words in a foreign language. You see the letters, but without understanding, they're just shapes on a page. This disorder also raises deep questions about how we experience reality. If your brain can see the world but fail to recognize it, then what does that say about how much of our perception is constructed, rather than objective? It shows that reality, as we know it, is filtered through our brains. And if the filter breaks, our experience of the world changes completely. As rare as it is, visual agnosia has fascinated scientists, doctors, and even philosophers for decades. It sits at the intersection of neurology, psychology, and philosophy, reminding us how mysterious and fragile our sense of self and our understanding of the world truly are. So the next time you look at an object and recognize it instantly without thinking, take a moment to appreciate that process. Because behind that simple recognition is a complex network of brain activity that can go wrong in the strangest ways. For those with visual agnosia, even recognizing a cup, a face, or a familiar place can feel like solving an impossible puzzle every single day. The Truman Show Syndrome, Truman Show delusion. Imagine waking up one day and suddenly feeling like everyone around you is part of a giant act. Your friends, your family, your co-workers, even strangers on the street, all secretly playing roles in an elaborate production. You're convinced that your entire life is a reality TV show, that cameras are hidden everywhere, and that millions of people are watching your every move. This isn't the plot of the Jim Carrey movie The Truman Show. For some people, this is a real psychological condition known as Truman Show Syndrome or Truman Show delusion. It's a rare but deeply unsettling disorder where a person believes their life is staged, directed, and broadcast for others to watch. Imagine how disorienting that would be. Never feeling like you have privacy, constantly second-guessing everyone's actions, and thinking that your entire existence is scripted entertainment. So, where does this unusual delusion come from? For many people, it seems to develop out of a mix of schizophrenia, delusional disorder, and paranoia. Patients often have underlying mental health issues, and the Truman Show delusion becomes one of the ways their mind tries to explain their feelings of being watched or manipulated. The popularity of reality television and surveillance in modern life probably fuels this specific kind of belief. Think about it. We live in a world where cameras are everywhere, on the streets, in stores, even in our pockets. Social media broadcasts personal lives to the entire world. So it doesn't feel like a huge leap, especially for someone struggling with psychosis, to believe that they're the star of a hidden show. Now, let's talk about some real-life cases, because this is where things get truly strange. One of the earliest documented cases was in 2003, when psychiatrists reported a man who traveled to New York City after September 11th because he believed the tragedy was staged just for him, part of his personal show. He thought the only way to escape was to find the director of the program. Another case involved a man who actually traveled to a television studio Demanding to be released from the show he thought he was trapped in. He believed that if he didn't confront the producers, he'd be stuck forever in the fake reality built around him. Then there was the patient who admitted to his psychiatrist that he was certain he was the star of a reality TV series. He believed that everything in his life, down to conversations with his family, was scripted for an audience. He would even change his behavior, trying to perform for the cameras he thought were hidden in his house. These cases may sound bizarre, but for the people experiencing them, the feelings are terrifyingly real. Their entire sense of reality is warped. They don't see their family as family. They see them as actors. They don't see their home as a home. They see it as a set. They don't see strangers as people going about their day. They see them as extras hired to fill the background of their show. What's even more fascinating is how this delusion affects daily life. People with Truman Show Syndrome often withdraw socially because they don't trust anyone around them. They may feel constantly anxious, thinking their every move is being judged by an unseen audience. Some even take drastic measures, like traveling to find the exit to the show, putting themselves in danger. And here's the chilling part. There's no clear way for them to test what's real. If they confront someone, "Are you an actor? Am I on a show?" and that person denies it, well, of course they would deny it. In the person's mind, the denial just becomes more proof that the conspiracy is real. It's a closed loop that traps them in their own belief. So how do doctors treat something like Truman Show Syndrome? Since it's usually tied to conditions like schizophrenia or severe delusional disorder, treatment often involves antipsychotic medication, therapy, and building trust with the patient. The goal is to slowly help the person reconnect with reality, while also addressing the underlying paranoia. In some cases, with consistent treatment, patients can recover and eventually recognize that their beliefs weren't real. But in other cases, the delusion is stubborn and very difficult to shake. What makes this syndrome so interesting is not just the delusion itself, but what it says about the times we live in. 100 years ago, someone with this kind of paranoia might have believed they were possessed, or that the government was following them. Today, with reality TV and the internet everywhere, the idea of being secretly filmed makes perfect sense as a modern version of that same paranoia. The human brain often uses familiar cultural references to explain strange feelings, and in our time, that reference happens to be reality shows. But let's step back for a second and think about what this means for all of us. We live in an age where privacy feels like it's slipping away. We put our lives online, we're constantly recorded by cameras, and many of us have a nagging sense that we're being watched more than ever. For most of us, that's just a background feeling, something we notice but move past. For someone with Truman Show Syndrome, though, that feeling takes over completely. The Truman Show movie itself ends on a hopeful note, with Jim Carrey's character escaping into the real world. But for patients with Truman Show delusion, there's no neat ending like that. It's a painful, confusing, and often isolating experience that requires compassion, patience, and medical care. At the end of the day, this disorder is a powerful reminder of how fragile our sense of reality really is. Everything you know about the world, your family, your friends, your daily routine, all of that depends on trust. Trust that what you see and feel is real. If that trust breaks, reality itself can collapse into something terrifying. So the next time you're out in public and you catch yourself wondering, what if someone's watching me right now? Remember, for some people, that thought never goes away. For them, life is a stage they can never leave, and every moment is a performance they never agreed to give. And there you have it, 5 of the strangest, most unsettling psychological syndromes ever recorded. From minds that split into different personalities, to those that believe they are already dead, to brains that can see the world but fail to recognize it. These conditions remind us just how mysterious and how fragile the human mind really is. What makes these stories so fascinating and so haunting is that they blur the line between reality and illusion. They show us that our sense of self, our sense of the world, even the simple belief that we're alive and real, all of it depends on the delicate balance inside our brains. And when that balance breaks, reality itself can collapse in ways we can hardly imagine. So maybe the scariest part isn't the syndromes themselves, but the realization that our own minds are what keep us grounded. That the difference between normal and terrifyingly strange might be just one step away. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the eerie side of psychology, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more stories that explore the hidden corners of the human mind, and share it with someone who loves chilling mysteries. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't out there in the world, they're right inside our own heads.